If you got a Bible, I'm going to ask you to join with me in turning to Proverbs chapter 6. Proverbs chapter 6. We're in this series called The Generous Life, and we're talking about what the Bible has to say about money and finances and using our resources. And as we think about that, let me show you this line. And my question is, where do you put yourself on that line? Some of us, we're kind of over on this side of the line, aren't we? We're more on the spending side. We kind of go through money. We're not always sure where it goes. It just kind of slips through our fingers. We always kind of have an idea of something else we can spend money on, and it's just really great when we have it, but then it goes. We're spenders. Others of us maybe we're on this end of the line, we're savers. I mean, some of you students, maybe over the years, you've had summer jobs and you've saved up and you've been very diligent in that. Others of us, sometimes it may even feel like it's hard to spend money even when we need to. So where exactly do you put yourself on this line? One of the interesting things over the years is Rose and I have always been meeting with couples who are preparing for marriage. We'll have a conversation with them about this. And it's so fascinating how often it feels like a person from one side of this line is marrying a person from the other side of the line. If you're married, maybe that is true in your marriage. It is true in our marriage. And my wife is married to the spender. That would be me. And if you are married and you find yourself on different parts of this line, it may be from time to time that this issue and how we handle money and finances and purchases and expenditures becomes a source of conflict and tension in your marriage. So as we look at this line, how does the Bible help us think about these different themes of saving and spending? Last week we started looking at really three themes in the Bible related to how we handle our money and finances, and really three themes that help us handle money well. And those were the themes of giving generously, saving wisely, and living appropriately. And so we're in the context of working through those three themes over 3 weeks. Now, as I said last week, and I just want to reiterate this again, the truth is when we look at these three dimensions of handling money well, the truth is a lot of people really do live from the bottom up. That is, we live in a certain way that, what we're really concerned about when we handle money is paying our bills, providing for our particular lifestyle. And the truth is, if over time our income goes up, well, so do our expenditures. We figure out ways to spend more. Financial experts refer to this as lifestyle inflation, right? As our income goes up, our expenses go up with it. And consequently, maybe we save to some degree. We kind of feel like we can save more. And then as we have opportunity, we give, but we're not always sure if we can do that, and it doesn't always feel like we have money to do those other things like saving and giving. And so we in essence live from the bottom up, and for some people, you just kind of get stuck on that bottom rung, that bottom bullet. If that's where you are, let me just acknowledge you are not alone. Going into this year, 2024, a survey was done asking people, if you're going to make New Year's resolutions, what resolutions are you going to make? And here's a list of the top New Year's resolutions for 2024. And notice what's at the top of the list? To save more money. So it's really not uncommon to live from the bottom up. That is, we live with prioritizing our expenses, our lifestyle, and then, if it works out, I'll save, and if it works out, I'll give. But as we started seeing earlier in this series, if that's where you're at, my challenge to you as we're talking about this is to flip the script. What does it look like to start from the top of that list and work down in terms of giving, saving, and living? Last week we talked about what it looked like to give generously, and today and next week we're going to talk more about saving and spending as we talk about those other two themes of saving wisely and living appropriately. Now, as we talk about this morning, I want to acknowledge, right, the Bible is written in a very different cultural setting, a different cultural time that's very different than ours, and in so many ways, finances are very different. Yet despite those differences, I think there's still lessons to be learned. And so today I want to just highlight a couple of lessons from the writer of Proverbs. And when the writer of Proverbs talks about money, he uses a really fascinating image. Now, as we come to Proverbs, let me just remind you, Proverbs is written to help us develop wisdom. That is, this book is really written to help us develop skill at living well, and that includes how we handle our money. And interestingly, in seeking to help us develop wisdom in this area, the author kind of uses a very surprising image. It's an image of ants. And he actually uses it twice in this book. I'm just going to show you one of these places, and this is found in Proverbs chapter 6. Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. Now notice what the author is doing. I think this is really fascinating, right? He's taking this very small insect, this little creature that so often is a profound annoyance in our lives, and he's saying, look, I know they're small, but you can actually learn some really big lessons from them. So, what exactly are we to learn here? Well, I think part of what we're to learn here is there's really a theme of what you might call responsibility and the importance of personal responsibility, right? Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. Notice it has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. Now, I realize today we understand in ant colonies there really is a kind of a command and control system. There is a hierarchy. But from the perspective of this ancient author, what he observed was, look at the way they take responsibility. Look at the way they initiate individually in being responsible in saving up. And so he's saying, look, I want you to see the responsibility that comes in handling your resources. But not only does he highlight this theme of responsibility, I think he also says something about our reality. And part of what he says is this. He says, look, I want you to see there are seasons of abundance and there are seasons of scarcity, right? The ants gather their food at the appropriate time, the time of harvest, so that they can have it later on. Now, in the author's context, in ancient Israel, they would have gone through different seasons during the year, seasons of planting, of growing, and harvesting. And for most crops, the harvest season would last 4 to 6 weeks. That was the season of abundance, right? That was the season when you had to store up provisions for future use. That was their reality. And the author's saying, look, you need to understand the world in which you live. There are seasons of abundance and seasons of scarcity. So the author says, look, this is your responsibility. You need to learn how to handle your resources. And this is your reality. They're going to go through different seasons in your life, and you need to be prepared for that. So be wise. And you need to save. Now, again, our situation, right? is very different. I don't go into the fields to harvest. I go to Aldi. And I love Aldi because I take a list and they've only got one thing of whatever I'm looking for. This is like my ultimate grocery store. This is designed for me. I'm deeply appreciative. It has revolutionized our marriage. So I live in a world that's very different. But nonetheless, these themes are still at work. I still do have responsibility, whether I'm going to embrace it well or not, to handle my financial resources. And in a real sense, even though, I don't live in an agricultural economy the way they did in the ancient world, I still live with the experiences of times of abundance and times of scarcity or need. That is, we live in a world where we realize there are going to be certain future needs we need to save up for. Maybe it's education. Maybe it's retirement. Maybe at some point you hope to be a homeowner and you're saving for a down payment. Maybe it's the realization at some point you're going to need a new car, right? There are these certain things we know we need to be saving up for if we are going to handle our resources well. So in a real sense, even for us, there are seasons of abundance, and there are going to be seasons that require more from us financially, and we need to be aware of that. And not only are there the things we know about, but let's be honest, often what really knocks us over are those unexpected expenses that hit us just in the flow of life, right? The water pump goes out on your car. The dentist tells you your child is going to need braces. Personally, I can, even in the flow of our life, even over the last few years, a few years ago, we had the situation where our furnace malfunctioned, and it just sent this layer of dust and smoke, fine layer of dust and smoke throughout the house. Now, the insurance covered all of the cleaning, which was great, but we still had to buy a new furnace, and that we weren't planning for that year. Or something more recent, last year, during the summer, even while Rose and I were traveling, our dog broke its leg, needed surgery. Wow. He has become a very expensive dog. I felt like, my goodness, I'm sending another kid to college and he's got 4 legs. This is what this bill looks like. And we didn't expect that, but those moments come to us in the flow of life. And my guess is most of us have those kinds of stories. We know the reality that all of a sudden a big need hits you, and are you prepared or not? So even though this is a very ancient letter, what the author is describing is our experience as well. There will be seasons of abundance, but also seasons of need, of scarcity, of surprising, unexpected expenses. This will happen. And I think all of us know it will happen, yet interestingly, even though I think most people kind of, at least intellectually, realize this is what life looks like, according to a survey last year by payroll.org, 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, which means we're not really prepared for some of these realities that the author is describing. So in this context, the author says, look, you need to learn to be wise. You need to take responsibility in how you handle your resources, and you need to understand the reality in which you live, which is a reality in which there will be seasons of abundance and also seasons where you have need, where you need to have been someone who has saved. And notice in this passage, what I find interesting, there's not simply a commendation of the ant. And of course, I think this is intended to get your attention. You're kind of like, really? You're going to tell me I can learn something from this little creature? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Not only is there a commendation, but notice in the second part of this passage, there's a warning. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest? And poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. That phrase, how long will you lie there, you sluggard? Scholars note that the way this is written, in essence, implies that the harvest is already started, right? Kind of the image is, hey, the harvest is underway. Everybody is out and participating in the harvest, but this guy is still just turning on his bed. And it's like, hey, you need to get up. Come on, let's go. Keep moving. My guess is some of you have had the experience of oversleeping, right, for school. You almost missed the bus, or maybe a member of your family, hey, come on, you got to get moving. You're going to miss the bus. You're going to miss this appointment. You know that feeling of kind of having to be woken up. Otherwise, you're going to miss out. That's actually I think the sentiment of what the author is saying. Hey, look, you need to get out there now. The harvest is underway. So how long are you going to stay in your bed? It's a type of warning. And in essence, the author, even across the pages of history, is saying, look, you need to think about this now. You need to embrace these issues now. Don't wait. Don't put it off. But unfortunately, in the warning, the person described here doesn't take action. He doesn't get moving. He will not begin things. One commentator has noted that he, quote, deceives himself by the smallness of his surrenders. So by inches and minutes, his opportunities slip away. And that's what the author is warning us against. Now, as you think about this, I don't really think people set out to live this way, right? I don't think people have a grand vision for their life where you say, I want to live in such a way that over time I create ongoing financial stress and financial pressure in my life. I don't think people start out that way. So how do we end up in the place the author describes here, right? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. How do we end up there if that's not really the place we want to be? Well, as you think about this kind of admonition to save and to plan, let me mention 3 things that can get in the way of living wisely with our money. The first I would mention is this, it's disorganization. And that is we don't really pay attention to where the money goes. We really don't have a plan. We don't have a purpose in how we handle resources. The money's coming in, it's going out, and we don't really pay attention to where it's going. And I think for some of us, the truth is, it's the little things that just add up, right? Times I eat out when I don't really need to. It's those digital subscriptions that I keep adding to, that just keep piling up, some of which I don't use. Maybe like me at one point, you had membership to a gym, and I'm not always sure I knew exactly where it was because I used it so infrequently. And so for some of us, here's the truth. For some of us, the truth is we think we have an income problem, but in truth, we have a spending problem. David Bach has written a kind of a fun little book called The Latte Factor. It's a modern parable about handling money well. And he talks a lot about, paying attention to where your money goes. And at one point in this little parable, in essence, he raises the question, what if some of those small expenditures in your life, like buying a latte every day, what if you became just more intentional in saving that little bit of money? How much of a difference could that make? And here's an illustration, right? Think about this, particularly if you're not really saving anything in your life right now. Think about this. What if you saved $10 a day? What if you adjusted your lifestyle in such a way that you could save $10 a day? And you invested that with an ongoing return of 10%. Obviously, if you save $10 a day over 1 year, the course of a year, you're saving $3,650. But if you invested that and were able to generate, from the market a 10% return over time, in 20 years, that $10 a day would amount to over $200,000. Now, I realize the market may not return over the next 20 years what it has returned in the past, but I think you get the idea that those little expenditures add up. The next time you buy one of those fancy coffees, just look at the cup and go, is this really worth $200,000 long term, right? So I think we can get stuck because we are disorganized. We're not paying attention to where the money goes. So if that's where you find yourself, that describes me, George, then let me just ask you, what would it look like for you to pay more attention to where the money is going? What would it look like for you to have a plan and a purpose for how you spend? Now, I realize in saying that, many of us would say, you know what, I've never been good at budgets. I'm not going to be able to kind of do that. That's too much work, and I get that. But here's what you need to understand. You actually don't need a budget to begin saving. What you can do is automate it. Set up your paychecks, your account in such a way that you're saving, whether it's going into a saving account, a retirement account, or something along those lines. Set it up so that it is done automatically. And believe it or not, there's actually a lesson we can learn here from the federal government. Did you know before World War II, taxes were actually simply collected at the end of the tax year? But moving forward, the government realized, we're going to be much more likely to collect these taxes if we automate the process. And so that's what they've been doing ever since. And you're just accustomed to having your taxes withheld in the process of being paid. So if the government can do this, why can't you? And I think here's what you will come to understand if you do that. As one of my colleagues, one of my friends was telling me this week, this was just a really helpful line. He said, it's easier to save it if you never see it. So if you're kind of disorganized, just kind of keep that in mind. What might that look like for you? So disorganization is, I think, one of the things that gets in the way of us learning these lessons from the ant that the author of Proverbs talks about. Here's the second D word, and that is debt. And in some ways, the two really go together, right? Our disorganization may lead to debt. We may be carrying debt in various forms, and of course, not all debt is bad, but some of us maybe are feeling the weight of unhealthy debt in your life. You may find yourself wondering, I'm not quite sure how I got here. And maybe you're simply stuck in the cycle of making minimum payments month after month, and that's just where you're at. But if that is where you're at, it's important for you to hear you don't have to stay stuck. If you're not sure where to start, just know as a church, we really can come along and help. We have financial counselors available, and we could connect you if you simply call the church office and make that request. Likewise, during this series, there are a couple of resources that we want to make available. First of all, we have a book available at the Hub that you can purchase called The Money Challenge, and it really kind of in a very foundational way walks you through these three big themes that we are talking about in terms of giving, saving, and living and what that can look like. And likewise, at the end of the book, the author introduces some key milestones and what does it look like to kind of work toward these important financial milestones in terms of financial health. And so with that in mind, we're going to do a 6-week elective starting next Sunday at 9 a.m., and that will utilize this workbook and kind of in a more concrete way begin helping you develop a plan to move in a healthy way in terms of your finances. So maybe that is a next step for you, particularly if you're like, parts of my finances are just in disarray and there is this debt that I would love to get rid of, but I'm not quite sure how to do that. So these are two of the factors that can really get in the way of us living well financially in the way that the author of Proverbs describes, the reality of disorganization, the reality of debt. And then the third I would just mention, and perhaps sometimes this is underneath the previous two, it's just desire, right? Sometimes this is what fuels our disorganization and our debt. We just have desires for certain things. We spend without reflecting, without planning. Of course, we'll talk more about spending next week, but my guess is at times you've made those expenditures and you're like, what was I thinking? Did it on impulse. You look back and, can't believe that I did that. In our house, when you visit our house, when you join us at one of the things that we host, you will notice 2 large recliners in our living room. This is one of them. And by the way, just a reminder, our next Coffee with the Davises is coming up next Sunday. So if you're newer to our church, we'd love to have you join us. And guess what? If you come over, you can sit in that chair. Please do. Usually when people come over, nobody wants to sit in the big chair. So we've got 2 of these big chairs. And as you sit in one of these big chairs, maybe it's helpful to know the backstory, because there's a backstory to these big chairs. And a number of years ago, Rose and I were out, and I think we kind of stumbled onto a sale at a furniture store. It may have even been a going out of business sale. Nonetheless, it was one of those sales where, all sales are final. That was in big letters. And we came across these 2 recliners. Oh, those would be great in our house. And so, we paid for them. We got them home. But here was the deal. We purchased them to go in our bedroom. And we got them home and they didn't fit. We hadn't planned ahead. So now they sit in our living room, and, it worked out fine. We eventually found some smaller chairs at a garage sale that kind of fit in our bedroom. So that's all good. But, every time I kind of walk into our living room and sit down in one of these chairs, it's just kind of a physical reminder. Yeah, you need to plan ahead. You need to be careful in how you think through the financial decisions of your life. So the author says, look, I want you to learn to be wise. I want you to learn to save now for those times when you will need these resources later. And in doing that, I think he's encouraging us also, just be attuned to these factors that can get in your way to do this well. So learn from this little creature, the ant. Now, I could just stop right here. We could close, and maybe I think many of you would be able to smile and say, George, I'm already doing this. I'm already doing this well, and if that's the case, I just want to encourage you in that. Likewise, maybe some of you would say, oh my goodness, I'm a little stuck here. But hopefully, if that's the case, hopefully this time together has kind of encouraged you to think about what your next step might be, and even as a church, how we could come alongside and encourage you in that. So we could stop right here. I could close, and in many ways that would be fine, but I also think it would be incomplete. Because in paying attention to how the author of Proverbs tells us to handle our money, I think there's one other passage that we also need to look at. Even as the author encourages us to save and to plan and to be wise in that, he also says this: do not wear yourself out to get rich. Do not trust your own cleverness. Cast but a glance at riches, and they are gone, for they will surely sprout wings and fly off to the sky like an eagle. Now, you may kind of, in reading the book of Proverbs, you read what he says in chapter 6 about the ant and the studious nature of the ant and the responsibility and the saving. You read that, and then you get to this passage in Proverbs 23, and you go, oh my goodness, how do I make sense of this? You may even wonder, is this book just a book of random sayings that have been collected and there's no real coherence in how they fit together? Well, I realize these statements may seem, at least first glance, to be contradictory, but here's how I think they go together. I do think the author is saying, look, you need to be responsible. And you need to learn to save for future needs and those unexpected realities. But he's also saying this: we need to do this in a way where the goal isn't simply, well, how much can I accumulate? And we need to do it in a way where we aren't assuming, you know what, if I save enough, then I can utterly control my life. And I really don't need God in the picture at all. So the author is saying, look, I want you to be responsible and learn to save and prepare for those eventualities where the resources you saved are the resources you need. But I also want you to do this in a way where it's not just about how much am I saving and how much can I accumulate and how can I absolutely control my life if I hit a certain number in my bank account. I don't want you to do that. So the question then, how do I balance these two? How do I keep both of these perspectives in view? Right? When do I know that I've saved enough? At what point have I kind of crossed a line? Or what are signs that I might actually be hoarding because I really want to control life, and this becomes a way in which I do that? When does that saving become unhealthy, right? I mean, we start to wrestle with these questions. And at some level, I wish I had a simple answer for you. And how do I balance this well? I'm not so sure I've got a simple answer, but I do have what I think is a helpful practice. And the practice is this: pay attention to the questions that you have about money. Right? When you think about money, what questions come to mind? In essence, what are your money questions? What are the money issues that kind of are forefront in your life? And again, for some of us, maybe it is, I'm saving for this particular event. I'm saving for this particular activity. I'm seeking to get out of debt and kind of get in a better situation financially. I'm saving for my retirement, and maybe those kinds of issues are the issues that are kind of generating financial questions. How am I doing? And of course, at times we're wrestling with, well, how much do I need to save? And what is the percentage and the numbers? And those are good questions. But if at some point we're not also asking, and what does it look like for me to live as a steward of God's resources? And what does it look like for me financially to live in the flow of God's grace? If we're not asking those questions, I think something may be missing. Because you see, even as this author gives us this, I think, really helpful illustration of the ant, and that can drive us to all sorts of questions about how to save well, how to plan well, how to prepare for the future well, all of which are significant. We can never lose sight of the fact that this illustration of the ant comes in a much bigger storyline. It's embedded in the bigger story of the work of Jesus Christ and the work of God's grace. It's embedded in the bigger story of the gospel. And the reality that through the work of Jesus Christ, we can now have forgiveness, and we're ushered into a new way of life. We're now part of what Christ calls the kingdom of God. And in being brought into this kingdom, this new way of life that now shapes how we handle our resources. And so we've already seen in the New Testament, it shapes our understanding to realize that, through God's grace, he puts resources in our life which we are to give, to share, to enjoy. So one of the ways to figure out, am I really kind of staying with a balanced view of being wise in saving, but also not wearing myself out to get rich? One of the ways to really wrestle with how am I staying aligned with those themes is this. Pay attention in your own heart to the money questions that you are asking. And make sure those questions ultimately align with the bigger story of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So again, the author of Proverbs gives us this illustration of the ant. And to some of you, I want to just say congratulations, because you're already putting this into practice and you are doing this well. To others of you, let me just encourage you that if you feel stuck, there really are next steps that you can take. And I just encourage you to take advantage even of the resources that we can provide you as a church to begin moving in a healthier direction when it comes to your family or to your finances. But for all of us, whether you fit into one category or the other, even as we think about the ant, may we see this as part of the bigger story. May we see our finances as part of the bigger story of the ongoing work of God's grace, and we have been called to live in the flow of that grace. With that in mind, let's pray. So, Father, as we think about this passage in Proverbs, I thank you just for this fascinating image from such a little creature. And I pray that as we've kind of unpack that image this morning, that I know some of us, there are ways in which it challenges us. And for some of us, even as we talked about the things that get in the way of handling our finances well, I think some of us can clearly acknowledge one or more of those items that is presently at work in our lives. So I pray we would be encouraged to take action. But Father, beyond that, I pray that we would understand these issues and how we handle our resources as issues embedded in a bigger story, which is the work of your grace. So even as we think about money, may we not lose sight of the wonder of Jesus Christ and the fact that he truly is bringing us into a new way of life. And this is one dimension of that. So I thank you for that reality. And I thank you for his work. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as you go, if there are areas in your life, even this area, where we can pray with you and kind of encourage you, we're going to have members of our prayer team here at the front, and we would love the opportunity to do that. So I just challenge you to take advantage of that opportunity to have people in your church family praying for you. Again, thanks for your support of our students. I encourage you, don't make sure you get to talk to at least a couple of them before you leave, just in ways of encouragement and taking those bookmarks, because this is one of the ways as a church family we come alongside our students. So now as you go, may you go just with a recognition that we need to handle our finances well. But may you also go with the recognition that how we handle our finances is embedded in a much deeper story of the ongoing work of God's grace. Amen.